Okay, we're actually at number 3 here of Potiphar's house, his probation time. There's going to be exaltation, but he's being tested by the Lord. His word hasn't come yet. And we've been to prophetic dreams, the pit, and now we're in Potiphar's house. He's sold as a slave, and he ends up being bought into Potiphar's house. Chapter 39 of Genesis and verse 1. Verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. He's bought as a slave, but part of the administration of Pharaoh's. Talk about the unseen hand of God. Verse 2, and the Lord was with Joseph. He was a prosperous man. He was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now here he's sold as a slave, estranged from his brethren, and the Lord is with him. When the Lord's with you, he'll enable you, he'll help you, but he doesn't, he takes you through the fire, not always around the fire, And anyway, verse 3, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. Whatever this guy touched worked. Verse 4, and Joseph found grace in his sight and served him. He made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from that time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Them that bless thee I will bless. And he's blessing the Egyptian's house because he's kind to Joseph. And verse 6, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not that he had saved bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. So he was a handsome fellow, had character, and he could so trust Joseph. He gave him his checkbook. You decide what money goes where, so to speak. Well, somebody mentioned this week, things seem to go good and something hits you. And verse 7, and it came to pass, now it's going to be a test in purity here. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Now Joseph's a servant here. Did our Lord become a servant? Took upon him the form of a servant, Philippians 2:7. But now the wife says, lie with me. He was a goodly person, well favored, well built. Verse 8. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. He trusts me with everything. There is none greater in this house than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Only one thing I can't touch, and that's his wife. It's going to happen on a bigger scale when Pharaoh gives him the whole kingdom in total authority. But he's learning at a lower level now. But this is God's school. So I can't sin, he says. Sin against my master, but also sin against God. He brings God into it, doesn't he? And it came to pass, verse 10, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her, to lie by her, to be with her. So it's constant. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. So he not by plan, but he's caught in the house, nobody but him and the woman. Not a good thing, okay? Verse 12. And she caught him by his garment and said, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Lie with me, and he just ran, and she's left holding his garment. She's humiliated now, okay? Verse 13, it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. He tried to rape me, we'd say today. It's a lie. Joseph is a pure man in that sense. We're all sinners, we understand. But did you know, to my knowledge, I haven't been able to find a direct failure of Joseph recorded. You can Abraham. You can Jacob. What a type of Christ. In him is no sin, 1 John 3:5 of Christ, who did no sin, 1 Peter 2:22. Christ totally pure, within and without. But Joseph's a picture of that. nothing that I can see labeled as sin, although obviously he was, is recorded about Joseph, and he withstands the temptation. Well, verse 16, and she laid upon his garments by her until his Lord came home, and then she tells him this false lie, and obviously the husband's upset. And look at verse 20. It's verse 19. And it came to pass when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. Now some have speculated, and I can't prove this, okay, that he should have been a dead man, okay, trying to rape the officer's wife. But some have speculated, those who do the plays of Joseph over in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and other places, that Potiphar had his doubts about her. And so though he was angry, and this is speculation, okay, he didn't kill him. He put him in prison, and since he's an officer here, he puts him in a prison where the king's prisoners are bound. So he's in prison, and verse 21 says, But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. You and I wouldn't look at that as mercy. That's the opposite of mercy. He's in prison unjustly. He's falsely accused. You know, our Lord Jesus in Isaiah 53:8, he was taken from prison and from judgment. He was held in prison during his trial. Was our Lord Jesus falsely accused? Let's go to Luke 23. Luke 23, please. Somebody read nice and loud. They bring him to Pilate. They lead Jesus to Pilate. If you read nice and loud, 23:2. 23:2 of Luke.
And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, the King.
Yeah, you're misleading our nation. The old translations are a bit stronger. We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. He's a social pervert, overthrowing government. That's a treason. Those are serious charges, falsely accused, just like Joseph was. But going back to our story here in chapter 39, the Lord was with him. You see, we don't always see the big picture. The Bible says, you know it in Romans 8:28, that we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and are the called according to His purpose. You know what His purpose is? Conform to the image of His Son. Next verse, verse 29. That's the big picture. Not to solve all your marital problems or any your job problems, your acne, whatever. It is to get you to the image of Christ. And the big picture doesn't say all things are good, but they do work together for good. And the big picture, he got to get before Pharaoh. Not any prison will do. And so the way to the palace is the prison. And so he's in the king's prison where the prisoners are kept. It's going to get him a link to Pharaoh. God showed mercy. The Lord was with him. But we don't see that in the trial. But his word's going to come someday. Well, whatever he touched worked. Look at verse 21. And the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Everybody just turned over everything to Joseph. Potiphar, now the keeper of the king's prison. He's being trained. All of Egypt, in fact, all of the world, the known world, is going to be turned over to him. My goodness. And he's at lower levels here, training for reigning. Do you not know the church was told that you shall judge the earth? 1 Corinthians 6:2. You're being trained. Well, and so there he is in the prison. Now, we get to chapter 40. The Lord is with him. It's strange to see these statements, but in negative things, he's with you. In chapter 4, it's a story of the prisoner, and while he's in charge of all things there, two of the king's servants get thrown into this prison. It's a royal prison. The king's butler and the king's baker. And they're thrown into prison next to Joseph. So he's with some royal servants of the household. He's in close proximity to those in touch with power in this prison. Well, these two men have dreams, and it troubled them. And the baker had a dream, the butler had a dream, so we have another set of two dreams, one by the baker, one by the butler. And we'll break in here at verse 7. Well, verse 6, chapter 40, verse 6. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. So these guys are sad. And he cared for them. He said, well, why are you sad? Verse 7. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sad today? What's wrong, boys? Yeah. And they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me, I pray you. I know God, and he's able to interpret. That's where he was at in his life. And he'll do it. So the chief butler tells him his dream. And he saw a vine and the branches and budded and blossoms and brought forth ripe grapes. Verse 11, and Pharaoh's cup was in mine hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave them the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And this is the interpretation, Joseph says. The branches are 3 days. The branches are 3 days. So there were 3 branches. They represent 3 days. Something's going to happen in 3 days. Verse 13, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. 3 days are going to find out you're innocent. And you're going to be back as the butler, taking him the wine and so on. And you'll be back in your position. And he adds this in verse 14. He is human. But think on me when it shall be well with thee. And show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. I'm in prison unjustly. So think on me, since I've been kind to you, and tell Pharaoh about this unjust prison I have. Well, how Henry knows this. How many judges here, I'm innocent from the prisoner? That's not going to work. Anyway, he wants a audience would at least get his case before the top power. He says, verse 15, for indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. I'm just innocent, okay? And he was. Well, the chief baker, verse 16, saw that the interpretation was true. He says, I can trust this man. And so the chief baker says, I had 3 white baskets on my head. In verse 17, in the uppermost basket, there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. I had all kind of meats for pastries, and the birds ate them. Verse 18, and Joseph answered and said, this is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Something's going to happen to you in 3 days. Verse 19, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. That's a little different. From off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and lifted up the head of the chief butler. He restored him, and the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership, and again he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Exactly came to pass. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Exactly came true, and the chief butler saw all this, and the baker's dead. So in the prison, he is numbered, closely associated with 2 prisoners. One ends up perishing, the one ends up living. Does that take you anywhere? Let's go to Luke chapter 23. Yeah, the cross. He was numbered among the transgressors, and as he hung on that middle cross, there was a thief on the left side and the right side. He's associated with 2 criminals. And though they both started out railing on him, we break in, and Luke gives us his unique account in Luke 23 and verse 39. And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, if thou be Christ Messiah, save thyself and us. You're some big messianic deliverer. You save us. Get me out of this problem. Save yourself. But the other, verse 40, answering rebuked him, saying, dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? Any fear here? We deserve what we're getting, verse 41. And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deeds, but this man hath done nothing amiss. He's done nothing wrong. I don't know how he knew all that, but he did. One of the most greatest acts of faith in the Bible is right here in verse 42. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. Crucified, bleeding, rejected, shamed, naked. And you're going to have a kingdom. Calls him Lord. He looked like anything but a Lord. Crucified in weakness, 2 Corinthians 13:4. He believed there's going to be power ahead. I'm not sure how he knew all that. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Faith. Verse 43, and Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. One criminal was saved, and one was lost. One prisoner is hung, and one lives. Think these are coincidences? An exhibit of Christ. From thence is the shepherd of Israel. And what a picture here, and there's so much more to come. So if you go back, if you would, to chapter 41. We're going to wind up here and give you a couple minutes to say something. Let me read the last verse of chapter 40. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, verse 23, but forgot him. Sometimes people forget all the good you do. He never mentioned him to Pharaoh, not to say it would have done any good. But when he does mention him, it's going to mean a whole lot. So even this forgetfulness is allowed by God. The timing's wrong. He's in God's school. And in that prison, remember Psalm 105, his feet were fetters and iron. Although he was in charge of things, he was still a prisoner. At night, it looks like he was locked up, They hurt his feet with irons. So it wasn't quite as elegant as you might think, although he had responsibility. Well, then verse 1 of chapter 41, and it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. Joseph, as you look at your sheet here under his probation, he's had training put down by family, the pain of the pit, prosperity in the house of Potiphar, purity, prison, persecution, and now patience. After 2 full years, he forgot. I don't know how long he was in there before that, but 2 years go by, not a word is said on his behalf. What does he do in those 2 years? I mean, his feet are hurt in irons and so on. And so it's one of the greatest tests when God doesn't act on our timetable. But the timing is going to be better when God does act. And Pharaoh dreams a dream, the third set of dreams, and it's a double dream. Verse 2, and he stood by the, and behold, there came up, stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, fat-fleshed, and fed in a meadow. He sees these 7, shall we say, cows, kine, fat, 7 of them. And then following that is 7 lean, skinny, skeletal kine. And they're so starving, they devour the 7 fat cows. And 7 fat cows disappeared, they're all gone. And because the 7 lean cows. And in the dream, he sees stalks of corn here. Look at, if you would, at verse 5. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up, one stalk, rank and good. 7 ears of corn on one stalk, and they were loaded with kernels, And then 7, number 7, thin ears come up, blasted by the east wind. The thin ears are so devoured, and so on. And Pharaoh woke up, and so on. And he was troubled. Came to pass in the morning, verse 8, that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told him his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Every wise man, every magician hadn't a clue what it meant, a double dream. Verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh's troubled over a double set of dreams. If that butler would have remembered them 2 years ago, the prisoner says he's innocent. Yeah. But now, he says he can interpret dreams. A need will be met. Pharaoh was wroth with me, verse 10, his servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was with us a young man in Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man to his dream he did interpret it. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. And when Pharaoh heard that this troubling set of dreams, there's someone who can interpret it. Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. One day you're in prison for years. The next day you're standing up by request to do something for the number one power in your world. From the prison to the palace. And when he was summoned, And I'm going to close with this. He shaved himself and changed his raiment. He's coming into royalty. Brother Henry was talking today, and there's a reference. The Lord's in our midst. On time has something to do with that. I don't want to be legalistic here. I wonder if dress might have something to do with that. The same way we do at the beach, we come to the Lord's assembly. At least those who are used to royal governments like England and Ireland, the old country, where they used to have kings and all that, they still have figurehead queens. And they dress up for royalty. In Malachi's day, when they brought him offerings that were lame and sick, Malachi says, would you do that to your king? So he brought in, you treat the Lord worse than you treat your king. There's some reasoning to this. I am not making rules here. But he shaved himself. He's not going to come in smelly prison garbs and scraggly beard. What an insult to Pharaoh that would be. So he looks presentable. And we leave our story right there. He's in the palace. And this evening after supper, we've gone from the pit to the prison to the palace. And the word of the Lord has just come. And it's going to change overnight. But now, brothers, in our remaining 3 minutes, do you have something you'd like to say before our two brethren edify us? Brother Jack.
You were talking about, you mentioned the fact that Potiphar didn't have Joseph killed. Potiphar is in the Egyptian scheme of things. I don't think he had the power to kill him.
Might be right.
Because he put him in the king's prison, and where only Pharaoh had that power. And therefore, take that similarity, the Jews didn't have the power or the right, and they were under the Roman government
That's a good point.
to kill the Lord.
They had to take him to Rome, didn't they?
Bring him to him. And then that also fulfilled the fact that
Yeah.
he was crucified because the Jews stoned people.
Yeah.
You know, so,
Pilate says, judge him. He said, it's unlawful for us to put any man to death. Yeah, thank you, Jack. That clicks there. I was speculating. I didn't know. I look at Hollywood movies. That's how they show it. But my goodness. But here Potiphar, and again, there's a bit of speculation, but it seems to match the reality that maybe he had no authority to put him to death. Only Pharaoh could. And so the Lord, Jews couldn't put him to death. Only Rome could. And of course they did. Okay, go one more here, and that is who? Scott.
I just think it's interesting to notice that anyone who comes into contact with Joseph wants to elevate him and give him responsibility.
Yeah.
They seem to immediately notice his trustworthiness.
Yeah.
It seems to characterize him. So when I go back in time and I see his father sending him out to check on his sons, and we pretty much know the character of the other sons, it just makes you wonder whether Joseph was really the only one that Jacob could really trust. And it shows that, that others thought the same thing as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're going to make the next brother, whoever he is, who is he? Who had their hand? Don. We're going to make it the last so our two brethren have their fair time.
The written word, the Bible, these fellows didn't have.
No?
The Old Revelation. When was they started reading the Bible? Leviticus or farther on?
When did people start to read the Bible?
They really had something to read rather than...
Well, this much I know. I don't know the whole answer to that, but this much I do know. When Moses was given the law on Mount Sinai, he came down in Exodus 24 and he wrote it in the book of the covenant, and he read it. Now, so that's when it was started to be read. Now, if the whole, I don't know if Genesis 1 was there yet or anything like that, but as far as the what's in Exodus and the statutes and judgments, which is now the Bible, in Exodus 24 it was written for the first time, besides the Ten Commandments with the finger of God, and they read it. So that's an answer I can give you. Okay. Okay. Brother O'Neill, are you ready, brother? He says yes. And then we'll hear from Brother Greg as the Lord leads him to encourage us. Come on.